Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. With me today, Chad Connelly. He is the man who delivered that impressive and record-breaking 81% evangelical vote for Donald Trump in 2016 as the first ever director of faith engagement at the RNC. He was also the chairman of the Republican Party of South Carolina, again, breaking records left, right, and center. He's running an organization now and has for years called Faith Wins, where he engages faith leaders and pastors all across the country to help people vote their biblical values and understand how they can be so effective in our civic universe here. So Chad, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us today. Now, you just had a conversation with Speaker Mike Johnson, and we all got briefed on what is going on today. What's going on? What did you hear from him? And what's the latest?
Well, thanks for having me. Obviously, I'm honored, but politically basic, that's what we need to have. I think we won this election a lot because we got back to basics. We did policies, and people talk about feelings all the time. We got to policies, and we went on policies. I talked to the speaker. I said, look, here's a list of congressional seats that I believe our program of what we call run up the score in the churches. The dormant, non-voting Christians are always the key in my world. I looked at that, and we win on margins, right? All the elections are on margins. And I said, I'd like to know your input on this, and don't need anything from you, but I'd love to know your input on what's going to matter next time. He's already thinking ahead to 2026. That's what I like. But he's also saying, boy, we got to deliver. This is a mandate. The trifecta, the White House, the House, the Senate, we have to deliver for the American people. This is what they voted for. And he just clicked off a list, Kyle, that everybody in there, it was electric. It was fantastic.
Yeah, we just heard also that he has been working this whole time in anticipation of how this election would go. So he's really hitting the ground running. And I'm so glad that you have his ear and are a trusted colleague of his. And he's staying. He's not going anywhere for the time being. So let's talk about that evangelical vote. Now, we don't have exact numbers, but you know better than anyone in this country, how did the evangelical voters come out this year? They came out in record numbers in 2016. Many people lay the win for Donald Trump at their feet. Did that happen again, do you think, this time?
I think it did. And I know some people come out with numbers like right away. I'm never comfortable with that. The very next morning giving concrete numbers. I'm a math guy. I got an engineering degree. I like getting real data. When that data dump comes late, probably Thanksgiving week or early December, we'll be able to take a good look. But that 81% number that Trump hit of evangelicals in 2016, I think we did better than that. Our early numbers are showing about 82%. Now, there was a lot of people that came out that hadn't been voting. There's no question that the president and these issues, the policies that matter, it really drove people out. But, our little team did meetings in 124 cities from July 1st to November. We were all over the place and just telling pastors, you don't have to be about R or D or candidate, but teach them to vote biblical values. I was actually with George Barna. I know you know Dr. Barna from Arizona Christian. He did a poll and did extensive polling that he just released. In fact, we did a meeting with 65 pastors in Phoenix, and he released that 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. And he said there are 3 things that motivate people to vote if they're in the church. And he acknowledged that 32 million Christians said, I'm not voting. I'm going to sit this out. But the 3 things he did the most, he said, number one is 17% of those 32 million said, I'll vote if my pastor says this is important. 14% more said they would vote if a friend, just think about that, a friend saying, you got to go vote, and 14% more. So that's nearly half of those 32 million would vote. And the third thing being the voter guides. Those 45% of those would go vote if they had a voter guide, if they had a friend to tell them to vote, or for pastor. Well, as you know, for 8 years now, that is all we do at Faith Wins. We go right at those low propensity Christian voters sitting in churches, but they're busy. They're raising kids. They're going to soccer practice. They've got church committees to go to. And so we just have to find a way to reach them directly and say, go vote. Here's a voter guide. Cut through the clutter. Don't miss this. It's important.
I can't wait for the data to come out. I am kind of waiting with bated breath to see what those numbers are, because I think that they're absolutely going to be on par with 2016 or higher. You guys are doing great work, but really the pastors did get energized and motivated, and you're also helping them navigate the political world here, because I think there's a lot of misconception, and correct me if I'm wrong here, about what you can talk about in church, what pastors can say with regard to elections and candidates. Did you get that sense? And please share with us kind of what you were hearing from faith leaders, were they open to that? Were they doing it? What did you hear from them when you were having all these conversations during this election season?
Well, you're spot on. And everywhere, I can tell a story in every city. Because as you know, and you've been to our meetings, your mom and dad have, when we go there and talk to pastors, and I tell them, I'll bet you know 5 or 10 pastors who need to hear this message that don't know this. They've been lied to. They think it's illegal. They somehow think that the First Amendment rights go away because they're a pastor or they're standing behind a pulpit. I think those First Amendment rights are enhanced because those are God's people delivering God's message to his people for them. I don't think they're diminished at all. I think they're enhanced and compounded. But a lot of them have been lied to. They've been faked out. They think it's illegal. We can't do this. Well, we know it's not illegal. In fact, the churches have a lot more latitude than they think they do. But every single city I went to, and another thing that you're hitting on here is last year, well, the last cycle, we had 9 different denominations host us. In the last 2 years, we've had 25 different biblical denominations host our meetings. It was an intentional thing. In fact, I added one about 3 weeks ago in Wisconsin. It was a church that the denomination would be known as kind of liberal. But the pastor, he'd come to a small meeting. I told my testimony of losing my wife to suicide. I wasn't going to do it, Kyle. I really wasn't. And his dad had committed suicide, and we connected. Isn't that wild? It's the way the Lord works in God's providence. He said, I'd like to host you and David Barton. We went back to his church, and he said, I'm educating my people here. And a lot of people in my denomination may not agree with this, but I believe this is our biblical obligation to do and to be involved. Everywhere we went, every state we were in, there was a story of a pastor who said, I've never heard it this way. One of the lines I started using was, you're not getting political. The political world has gotten spiritual, and they're coming in the church. And if there are ever judges appointed who think it's okay for some of these nonsensical, lack of common sense things that we're seeing, you're going to lose. So, Pastor, I'm not asking you to be an R or a D or, wear anybody's hat or T-shirt or nothing. But I'm asking you to teach your people let's register everybody to vote, number 1. And number 2, let's teach them all to vote biblical values. Here's some voter guides to show them how.
That's incredible. And I heard something interesting talked about a little bit more this election cycle than I have before, which was, churches often kind of feel that threat looming over them of losing their charitable status. Yeah. And this cycle, what I heard was, forget it. If we lose it, we lose it. Probably won't, because they're not doing anything that is going against the law. But they're standing back up, especially after so many were shut down during the pandemic. And a lot of people are really refreshed by and encouraged by seeing pastors and churches stand up and boldly preach biblical values, which are always political issues. Everything is political now. You can't avoid it.
Can't avoid it.
Yeah.
I was in a church in Wisconsin, and the pastor got saved later in life, tattooed up, big church, growing church in a real key area. He told me almost all that. What if I lose my tax exempt status? I said, Pastor, no church has ever lost their tax exempt status. And nonpartisan voter registration is something everybody ought to do. I mean, when I read Matthew 5 to be salt and light, and Jesus is pretty clear. He said, if the salt has lost its savor, its flavor, it's good for nothing to be thrown in the street and trodden before the feet of men. Sounds like a bad day to me, Pastor. That pastor got involved after, I think I met him 2 years ago. He hosted us again. And we done a luncheon last time. We did an evening session, 500 and something people. Here's what he did. He did voter registration. He had nearly 100% of the people committed to vote. He took pledges. Number 3, he recruited poll watchers in his church, and they took over the local city council with church members because they were sick of the woke agenda that was going on. That's a pastor that I've watched now over a 2-year span where he came from, oh my goodness, I'm going to lose my tax exempt status. I can't do this, to he went to the city council and decided this is ridiculous. And his church, he challenged his church. Let's get involved. They took the entire city council over in that town for biblical values.
What a great example of showing real, true leadership. I hope more will follow along. And the poll watchers were also a big part in this election. Now, that has a lot to do, too, with what we've seen happen in the RNC. So you were in the RNC in the Reince Priebus days. You guys did tremendous work that was very effective. Then there was a leadership change. Ronna McDaniel came in through the 2020 election, and it shifted again. He put Lara Trump, co-chairing with Michael Whatley. And we saw a lot of oversight and again, delivered quite a decisive deafening win for the Republicans, loss for the Democrats. What do you think is the current status of the RNC, having been through all of that history? And the Republican Party has changed and shifted tremendously during that time too. You've been there for all of it. Where is the RNC going from here?
It's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of that's just to be determined. They did a very unorthodox new approach. Very rarely had you seen a presidential candidate replace leadership at the RNC. They chose to go this way. And he's a nominee, his choice. Usually they had shadowed, they kind of put a shadow leadership team in. This time they just said, we're going to put our entire team in. And they farmed out and subcontracted things like door knocking and other ballot chasing initiatives. They farm those out to groups. And I think it's going to be something that's going to be a discussion. But you can't argue with the results. And they won big. And I do think President Trump gets a lot of credit because he ran an unorthodox campaign. You ever seen a presidential campaign? You hop in a garbage truck or serve French fries or go on Joe Rogan's podcast? So there were things like that I think the party and the tactics mirrored an unorthodox kind of campaign. I think that's what we're seeing. I do think a lot of that stuff will be determined over time, though.
It will be interesting to see because when you look at the Republican Party, which people of faith have usually aligned with there's a strong majority, but the party shifted a lot in this election season. They called it Big Tent, right? We're welcoming in all different types of people with different political ideologies. Are people of faith still aligning with the values? The platform changed and there was language removed having to do with marriage and life and things like that some people were fine with and understood the vision and it ruffled some feathers. Do you think that we're still on track? Has it been a situation where it's been more attractive to people in their faith life and that's such an important part of their life now? How do you see this all coming together right now, specifically for people of faith with the Trump administration coming in again?
The groups that weren't typically in the Republican tent have a strong faith background. The Latinos, the Black conservatives that probably weren't Republicans that are now or have been. I think President Trump really spoke to them, but a lot of the issues that they cared about, did you see the NFL ads about, hey, she wants to pay for trans surgeries for prisoners with your tax dollars? She's for they, them, he's for you. Those are social, biblical issues. I say all the time, hey, this is not a political issue. It's a spiritual one. It's been politicized. And I really think this new Big Tent is back to the policy stuff. I talk all the time about policy, because I know that the word Republican or Democrat or conservative, even liberal, that can turn off some people because they've already got a label in their mind of what they think that means. And we know candidates can turn off people. So I always talk about issues and get people to look at voter guides and issue comparisons to make them think through that. Look, this is going to be a tension thing. How do you settle in that? Where is the Big Tent and where does it stand? The people I'm talking to, pastors from multi-ethnic, multi-denomination groups, they're totally with us. And the things that attracted them might not have been, Biden's comments about your garbage or the border, but it was the whole thing about the parental rights, the transing, and sometimes the life issue. And so I think there's a lot of discussion to be held. I think that the Trump people would say, hey, we got to win first, and then we'll go back and do the issues. We want to do something real basic and streamlined and go right at the issues that people relate to. Let's face it. President Trump is a transformational, now historical figure. 2 assassination attempts, the lawfare, they went after this guy like nobody's business. And yet he's picking up votes in non-traditional Republican areas. I think the faith community is always going to be attracted to the line of alliance that most closely aligns with the biblical worldview. And that's going to be life and biblical marriage and Israel, obviously. I think border security because of national sovereignty. Things like that matter to people of faith. And I think one thing I've told a lot of media people, especially lately, is you want to label those church people as only caring about life or marriage. Look, they're paying for groceries too. They're paying for gas. They want energy independence. They want a secure border without this human trafficking and drug trafficking going on. They care about everything. Don't miss that. So I believe the party's got their work cut out for them to build and keep this cohesive.
Yeah. I think one thing that Trump and his campaign did really well was seeing down the road and having foresight about what's happening with the mainstream media. We are literally watching it dismantle and dissolve right before our very eyes. And the mainstream media has tried to tell us as a nation who we are, what we think, and what we're going to vote for. And that was a referendum on them that Harris lost so profoundly. And Trump has set himself up in a really unique and I think a very strong position, having a more broad platform to say, okay, now we know truly, not what the media is telling us, but we know who these voters are and what they care about and what they want, where they stand. And we're going to build that going forward. So I think it was very brilliant in a lot of ways.
You are not kidding. I was on News Nation a couple of weeks ago, and they kind of ambushed me on the Madison Square Garden. I'd flown in. I went to church. I didn't sleep. And I do this, and I get like a 20-minute head start. I want to talk about Madison Square Garden. I hadn't watched Madison Square Garden.
Right.
And they want to ask about the Puerto Rican, the guy that made the
floating island of trash.
Yeah, the joke. And so I was like, oh, Lord, you better let the Democrat strategist go first, not me. And it was the former governor of Puerto Rico. And I'm like, oh boy, they set me up.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, Lord. And so the guy went on and on and on. And I just pivoted. I said, well, my guess is some consultant is getting chewed out right now. However, I don't care what color you are, what background you are, you got to buy groceries. And Dana was watching in the room. She said, he was nodding with you. But here's the point, what I think the takeaway is. I don't know how the media recovers. They're accustomed to setting the narrative. And like you said, telling us what to think. They can't set this narrative anymore because there's too many other influencers that, whether it's on social media platforms or podcasts like this one, that people are listening to for their information. They're not watching Walter Cronkite like I grew up on or whatever. They're not watching Brokaw. They are looking at a whole different set of resources that give them the information they want. I mean, who would have thought a presidential candidate hops in a trash truck? And he made the media run to him. I thought it was hilarious. I did another media hit about that, and I talked about how important it was. They came up with that on Trump Force One flying, and they had like 6 or 7 hours to find a clean trash truck and to put a sign on it. We've have a major paradigm shift in media. I believe that's going on. I believe the legacy media is maybe they're done. And maybe it's time that America actually speaks on how they get information. I do think it's important we educate people on here's some other sources, and you don't have to just listen to these people because there's a lot more out there you can pick and choose from and learn from.
Absolutely. You're so right. And it will be fun to watch that come together. It's quite enjoyable. So I know.
I'll grab the pot full.
Well, I've only got you for a few more minutes, Chad. So I would love for my listeners to hear from you. What's the way forward? What is Faith Wins focusing in on? It's been this just massive effort. Congratulations again, because I know how hard you and your team have worked. Everyone in these churches, everyone leading the churches, people of faith, and really just want to congratulate the American people for stepping up and making sure their voices are heard. What's next?
So we're going to continue to expand the reach, but as I've told a lot of friends around us, we've built a big stick and it's time to swing it. I think what pastors have told me is they loved getting engaged. In Pennsylvania, I got 2 pastors who recruited 533 poll workers. A lot of the stories you saw on television leading up to the election, those were church people at the precincts. When the 86 people got denied in Allegheny County, those were all church people. They weren't from a party. They weren't from a campaign. My pastor there led the way, and when they got blocked, he called a hotline. He got them in. It took them 20 minutes. It was because somebody was on the ground. I think you're seeing a rising of the church. I really do. And you know how it is. We all need to see some wins. We need to say, hey, this works. This is a good idea. And because we don't push party or candidate, we push, do your biblical obligation to be salt and light. Jesus himself said it. You go find out. And look, I think it's bigger than that. I think it's maybe you need to be the little league coach. Maybe you need to get involved with the scouting in the community, but you sure need to be voting, and you ought to be voting biblical values, and you ought to be finding out where these people stand. So what's next for us is we're going to continue to expand the reach. I believe what a lot of the political thought leaders are saying, it's going to take time to get this country back off this precipice. We were leaning over into a deep abyss, and where government was becoming more centralized and more powerful. And now this is being given back to the people. The Agency for Government Efficiency, that would have been an oxymoron, what, a week and a half ago? And now Trump has created an agency that exists to end itself. That's fantastic. He's talking about moving agencies out of Washington, D.C., out into the various states so that some of this federal bureaucracy and red tape gets broken up. That's brilliant. And there are things going on that I believe a lot of the paradigms that people have seen their entire lives are going to be questioned and examined and taken a good deep look at. So what's next for us is we want to support that. And we want to support it with the church. We want to show the church how they can be effective and how to use the tools and resources we provide to go and make a difference in their community, state, nation.
You're going to do it. You work harder than anyone I know, and you're so effective. You know, I started Politically Basic. I would kind of halfway joke about making politics fun again.
Yeah.
Let's make politics fun again. And you know what? It kind of has become fun again. It's fun when you see your hard work and your values that you're putting forward make a difference. And I think it's happening. Well, we're so grateful to you and for you, Chad. Thanks for giving us your time today. And you know I'm going to ask you back again.
I can't wait.
Thank you, sir. We love and appreciate you and everything that you're doing. Well, thank you all so much for joining me for this episode of Politically Basic. It's so important that we're hearing from people just like Chad who are boots on the ground, having these critical conversations. Please follow the work that they're doing at faithwins.org. Make sure you're following us at Politically Basic and on politicallybasic.com. And we will see you next time.